And now, your daily dose of debate, breaking news, and uncensored views. This is the Michael Medved Show.
And another great day in this greatest nation on God's green earth, a great day for surprising revelations. Revelations about the White House and the White House staff. The leader of the White House staff, the chief of staff, Susie Wiles, has issued 10 interviews. They are 10 interviews with Chris Whipple, who is a fine writer who has been a guest on this show. He's been a guest on the show for his book covering the history of White House staffs and basically rating how they perform. He had the privilege of interviewing the White House Chief of Staff, Susie Wiles, and what she had to say was shocking, frankly. The way it was summarized by CNN, the White House Chief of Staff, Susie Wiles, delivered a series of unusually candid and at times unflattering assessments of President Donald Trump, his second-term agenda, and some of his closest allies in a series of wide-ranging interviews with Vanity Fair that were published today. Across more than 10 interviews, Wiles spoke frankly about working for Trump, saying the president has an alcoholic's personality, that despite being known as a teetotaler. She acknowledged the president's appetite for revenge, conceding that many of his second-term actions were driven by a desire for retribution. He loves the term retribution and uses it a lot. Wiles suggested that Trump was pursuing regime change in Venezuela through his boat bombing campaign, contradicting official justification for the strikes. And she described several controversial areas where the president ignored her advice. By the way, all of those areas, Susie Wiles is obviously correct, but again, she's the one talking about it, including one bit of advice on deportations and pardons, two areas where President Trump has taken action that is deeply questionable. We will get to this and what it means and some of the specifics in these Susie Wiles interviews, which coming at the end of the year are extremely dramatic for showing a beginning of disagreements within the inner circle of the Trump administration. Meanwhile, there is also a response from President Trump to his outrageous initial reaction to the death of Rob Reiner and his wife, Michelle Singer Reiner. The facts of the matter are these, that Nick Reiner, the 32-year-old son of the two Reiners who were murdered, is responsible for the deaths of his parents. That is according to a police statement from Los Angeles police, because where they were killed, their home in Brentwood where they were killed, is within the city limits of Los Angeles. The 32-year-old son, Nick Reiner, was booked on suspicion of murder and is being held without bail, which is an indication usually that there's not much doubt that he was the killer of both his mother and father. A source said Reiner was seen arguing with his father at a holiday party at Conan O'Brien's home. That was on Saturday. A day later, the beloved Hollywood couple was found dead in their Brentwood residence. The double homicide case will be presented to the Los Angeles County District Attorney today, when prosecutors will decide what charges to pursue. What they are not going to pursue is the Trump idea that what killed Rob Reiner was Trump derangement syndrome. The evidence that there was any passion or concern or emotional reaction to anything about President Trump because there's no indication that Nick Reiner, the son of Rob Reiner, was opposed to his father's politics, which was progressive, which was he was an active Democrat, but some of the leading Republicans in Hollywood have stepped forward to talk about what a great guy Rob Reiner was. And there's a very moving tribute to Rob Reiner that we will get to later. There is also new details are emerging about the two evil suspects in the Bondi Beach massacre. That was where they started firing more or less at random at a crowd of 1,000 people who had gathered for a menorah lighting in Australia, in a very popular beach in Australia. And by the way, it's also a part of Australia, Bondi Beach, as a neighborhood with a substantial Jewish community. And 15 people minimum have died, and others are in critical condition and still in the hospital. New details are emerging about the two suspects in the Bondi Beach massacre and their likely links to ISIS. Authorities say the father and son duo accused of carrying out the Hanukkah attack had recently traveled to an island in the Philippines known for Islamist insurgency. Counterterrorism officials believe the alleged gunman underwent military-style training while there. The two suspects targeted Jewish Australians. There are an estimated 117,000 Jews, many of them, by the way, people who are either families of or themselves Holocaust survivors. But 117,000 Jews in the whole nation of Australia. And Sydney, the biggest city in Australia, is not the biggest Jewish community. That would be Melbourne. But there has been, as one can understand, just extreme concern and outpouring of emotion by that Jewish community in Australia and by Australians generally. The counterterrorism officials believe the alleged gunman underwent military-style training in this ISIS island. No, it had nothing to do with Jeffrey Epstein. The two suspects targeted Jewish Australians celebrating the first night of Hanukkah. Authorities said the attack, which killed at least 15 people, is Australia's worst mass shooting in almost 30 years. Now, after that other mass shooting 30 years ago, there was a very energetic and decisive reaction to try to limit access to firearms. The Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese of Australia, is talking about the same kind of reaction this time. And then that other shooting with an unidentified perpetrator, a manhunt is underway for the suspect in the deadly shooting at Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island that occurred on Saturday, the same misbegotten, horrible, tragic weekend. The killer at Brown University left 2 students dead and 9 others injured by his gunfire. On Monday, authorities released photos and videos of a new person of interest who was suspected of opening fire on the Ivy League campus. The individual is described as approximately 5'8", with a stocky build. A $50,000 reward is being offered for information leading to an arrest and conviction. Another person of interest detained in connection with the attack has since been released and cleared in the investigation. And then, speaking of death and death by violence, there are more strikes against 3 alleged drug trafficking boats in the Pacific Ocean. How many people have now been killed in those strikes against the drug boats? 95. We will get back to that and to more on a busy day here on the Michael Medved Show. And the news is that the U.S. military carried out more strikes in your name. in the name of the American people against 3 alleged drug trafficking boats, these in the Pacific Ocean, the Eastern Pacific, on yesterday. 8 people were killed, according to the U.S. Southern Command. That means that at least 95 people have now been killed so far in strikes on suspected drug vessels as part of a campaign that the Trump administration says is aimed at curbing narcotics trafficking. And all senators' briefing on the strikes is scheduled for today and will include Secretary of State Marco Rubio and, of course, Defense Secretary, he prefers to be known as the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth. With the operation under growing scrutiny, Hegseth has defended the military's actions in the Caribbean and the Eastern Pacific, saying they demonstrate the strength of American resolve. But is this the American resolve to cut back on drug traffic? Or is the real intention, as Susie Wiles, the White House chief of staff, just said in a series of interviews, the real goal is regime change, is getting rid of Maduro, the president who does nothing but cheats in elections, and he really does. The president of Venezuela. And we will see what happens there. Meanwhile, there is more reaction that has come up about President Trump's statements yesterday in reaction to the murder of Rob Reiner in Hollywood and the murder of his wife at the same time. It is apparently their son who is the main suspect. How the police identified the son as the killer is unclear, and there's no word yet as to whether he is pleading guilty or not guilty. He is being held without bail right now. But to give you some sense of the context of President Trump and his remarks, there's a column that has gotten a great deal of attention in Hollywood by a Hollywood commentator named Richard Rushfield. And he writes, why are the deaths of Rob Reiner and his wife Michelle Singer Reiner so uniquely grotesque? Because, he writes, Rob, a figure in our world who was the personification of kindness and decency, met an end beyond the stuff of nightmares, killed alongside his wife in an apparent homicide with their son now in police custody. It's the killing of the unicorn, Rushfield writes. It feels like the last spark of humanity in this whole damn place has been snuffed out, which is why it's not just one family's horror, but a deep wrong against the entire community, against anyone who knew him and was touched by him. Even before the killing of the Reiners, the horrors of the past couple of days at Brown University here in the U.S., where 2 people have been killed and 9 injured, and a shooting where the suspect is still at large, and Bondi Beach in Australia, where a father and son carried out an anti-Semitic attack during a Hanukkah celebration, killing at least 15 people. Not only did everything make so many of us feel unsafe, the visitation of endless episodes of gun terror and nothing will be done to stop it, he writes, that worldwide anti-Semitism, prodded and winked at by so many corners of both ends of the political horseshoe, is now out of the bag in a way that will mean nothing but more horror. There was also horror at the comments that President Trump made about Rob Reiner, basically saying that he was suffering from Trump derangement syndrome. And basically, Trump came very close to saying Rob Reiner had it coming because he was so anti-Trump. as if it didn't matter, the great movies, including The Princess Bride, which is a special favorite of so many Americans, the great movies he made. No, what mattered was that he was never in any of Trump's elections a supporter of Donald Trump. And Donald Trump is refused to step back from him saying that what killed Rob Reiner was Trump derangement syndrome, which is what he said on Sunday after the murders were discovered. This is Trump yesterday, Monday, in the White House, when he was asked about Rob Reiner and if he would stand by his very controversial comments that were negative about Rob Reiner when the bodies were not even buried yet from this horrible crime. Here is President Trump clip 22.
A number of Republicans have denounced your statement on Truth Social after the murder of Rob Reiner. Do you stand by that post?
Well, I wasn't a fan of his at all. He was a deranged person as far as Trump is concerned. He said he knew it was false. In fact, it's the exact opposite, that I was a friend of Russia, controlled by Russia. You know, it was the Russia hoax. He was one of the people behind it. I think he hurt himself in career-wise. So he became like a deranged person, Trump derangement syndrome. So I was not a fan of Rob Reiner at all in any way, shape, or form. I thought he was very bad for our country, yeah.
We will get into this issue with David French, who is one of those conservatives who was horrified by what Trump had to say. Just to make it clear what Trump said that was so controversial, he posted, "A very sad thing happened last night in Hollywood," Trump wrote on Truth Social. Rob Reiner, a tortured and struggling but once very talented movie director and comedy star, has passed away together with his wife, Michelle, reportedly, he says, due to the anger that he caused others through his massive, unyielding, and incurable affliction with a mind-crippling disease known as Trump derangement syndrome, sometimes referred to as TDS. He was known to have driven people crazy by his raging obsession of President Donald J. Trump, with his obvious paranoia reaching new heights as the Trump administration surpassed all goals and expectations of greatness, and with the golden age of America upon us, perhaps like never before. This is extraordinary. Can you imagine? What is it? We'll ask David French coming up of the New York Times. What is it that leads Trump to view a horrible murder as somehow a validation of his own greatness? We will get to that and more coming up on the Medved Show. And on the Michael Medved Show, it is always a pleasure to welcome back my friend David French, who is a distinguished commentator, a columnist for the New York Times. He writes about religion, about values, about culture, about armed conflict. He is a decorated veteran of recent conflicts for the United States, and basically the future of where we are and where we're going. If we can begin, David, you have a terrific column, which I hope everybody will read. And the title that they gave it is a little bit confusing, which is what happens.
It is a little double meaning, yes.
What happens if you refuse to recognize we are in a death spiral? And you do not believe we are in a death spiral. You make that very clear at the very beginning of your article. You say this about the new right. The new right, you say, contrasts its vision of a glorious past with a miserable present. This month, Matt Walsh, a popular right-wing podcaster with millions of social media followers, wrote, "It is an empirical fact," he said, "that basically everything in our day-to-day lives has gotten worse over the year." the quality of everything, food, clothing, entertainment, air travel, roads, traffic, infrastructure, housing, etc. It has all declined in recent years, plural, in observable ways. Okay, what's wrong with what Matt Walsh had to say here?
Almost everything. Almost everything. But it really does encapsulate a worldview that I've encountered in parts of the right, which is there was this glorious, glorious past that they took from us. But the reality is today we live longer, we have higher wages, we live in larger and more luxurious homes, we have more civil liberties, including more free speech, more religious freedom, we have lower divorce rates, we have much lower abortion rates, although they've increased a little bit in the last couple of years, but much lower abortion rates than at the worst, much lower crime rates, including murder rates, rape, and violent crime. And by a number of empirical measures, a lot is getting better. Now, to be clear, some things are getting worse. So, for example, the unemployment rate ticked up today. It is, and we do have a housing affordability problem in many cities. So it's not like we live in utopia. We never have, we never will. But this sort of idea that we're locked in a death spiral of in terminal decline is just belied by a lot of empirical facts.
Okay, and how do you try to reach young people who are convinced that the Matt Walshes of this world are right, that they have every reason for gripe and grudge and complaint rather than gratitude for where we stand in the United States of America?
Well, before I talk about how we reach them, I'll tell you how you don't reach them. And that's the way when I've been talking about these issues over the last several years, what I've found is that even when you relay empirical facts that contradict the doom narrative, they'll respond with anecdotes, with individual things that exist that really make them angry. And sometimes those things are real, or sometimes those things are false. But the bottom line is what you're dealing with is a very emotionally rooted problem that is not necessarily susceptible to a fact-based argument. And so then what you have to do is you have to get at the emotionally rooted problem. And I think part of that emotionally rooted problem, Michael, is actually related not to the kids, but to the parents, that in a lot of ways, the younger generation is responding to the cues that the older generation has put out. We haven't been able to handle our smartphones. We haven't been able to handle disagreement online.
I don't even know how to operate it.
Yeah. And so when I was younger and we had major conflicts in the world, I could look to my parents and see them as sources of stability. That, they weren't Pollyanna-ish. I mean, the Cold War could be scary at times, but they were also calm. And here's what I think happened. I think we lost our calm and our kids picked it up. And so I think that one of the key ways for us to heal the future generations is to, in many ways, heal ourselves, to be able to take, as older people who should be able to mentor and lead, we have all too often just been a big part of the problem. And so I think a lot of what has to happen is America's younger generations need to see America's older generations behave better. Because if you're younger, you're going to take cues from those who are older and you're going to magnify it. You're going to amplify it. And I think that is what's happened.
And when you talk about behaving better, one of the great religious values is gratitude.
Yes.
Is expressing, even when there are terrible things that happen in the world. And I thought that there was a very interesting quote that you had in here, is that a lot of people who think that we are in this death spiral and the end is coming point to the idea that we actually have drag queens who go to local libraries and do readings for kids. Now, I agree that's awful. I would never sanction that. However, there's an answer to the idea of the proliferation of drag queens, and the answer is brilliant. Give it.
Well, this comes from my friend Kevin Williamson, and he says, over time, we've had more drag queens and less slavery, which kind of puts things in perspective, doesn't it? So the past wasn't so golden. and you don't even have to go to slavery. We had Jim Crow, for example. We had a lot of things, even, they'll often pull out pictures from the 1950s of sort of an idyllic upper middle class or wealthy lifestyle that existed in the 1950s and implied that that's what we all had, when it was far from that. I mean, far in the 1950s, a lot of people still didn't have indoor plumbing in parts of America. I mean, this was
not just that. To integrate high schools and colleges, they had to call out the National Guard.
Had to call it the National Guard, yes,
to protect students who had every right to go to a particular high school, but were being kept from doing so because of their darker complexion.
And the idea that life is worse now than it was then, when the National Guard is protecting like Black 8-year-olds from mob violence. I mean, so yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things that are absolutely crystal clear when you look at the historical record. But again, I keep going back to this. This younger generation is picking up cues from us. And I went and I showed some statistics from 2014, 11 years ago, before Trump entered the scene, that showed how much Americans were hating each other even in 2014. And you can go all the way back to the end of the Cold War and the rise of the culture wars and the fighting between right and left during the Clinton years, for example, to show that, at this time of extraordinary peace and prosperity, we began to introduce an enormous amount of negative polarization where we were turning against each other. And we're tasting the bitter fruit of decades of polarization right now.
Okay, to keep this in context, and I want to go on to this, what do you say? President Trump says we are in the middle of a golden age. The golden age has already arrived. Susie Wiles, his White House Chief of Staff today, contradicts that idea to some extent, but we will get to that. How do you contradict the idea that we live right now in a golden age and it's all due to the leadership of Donald Trump? How do we contradict that idea or answer that idea without being part of this death spiral narrative about how things are worse today than they ever were before? It's a contradictory need that we have, and we will meet that need with the help of David French, columnist for the New York Times, author of a book about American secession, not in the Civil War, but potentially now. That and more coming up on The Medved Show.
Medved.
Jingle bell rock, jingle bells swing, and jingle bells ring, snowing and blowing.
And on the Michael Medved Show, pleasure to be speaking with David French, a distinguished columnist for the New York Times, a widely respected conservative voice, and a voice that is pro-faith and pro-religion and pro-conscience. And his most recent column in the New York Times is a powerful piece about coming forward with more gratitude for where we are and less of a feeling that we are somehow fallen away into a death spiral. But what about that? President Trump, and I believe he said it again in the last 48 hours, that we have actually arrived at a golden age for America. Now, that's not true, and I don't think you think it's true. But how do you answer that kind of claim that America is now, quote, great again, without contributing to this death spiral narrative that you decry?
Well, there's a giant gap between death spiral and golden age. Like these are your two poles. It's like North Pole and South Pole, and there's some range between there. So you can say, for example, that America and much of the developed world is living by the big sweep of history in a golden age. Absolute poverty is down, life expectancy is up. So if you're going to look at sort of the big sweep of history, you'd really rather live in 2025.
Yeah, we had vaccines today, right?
Yeah, exactly. So you'd really rather live in 2025 than almost any other time in world history for a million different reasons. But at the same time, the question is, are we getting better or are we getting worse? In other words, are we progressing or are we regressing? And the thing that I would say with Trump, in many material respects, Trump is causing us to regress, and he's causing us to regress in a couple of ways. I mean, one, he's putting some obvious drags on the economy, for example, through tariffs. But in a more profound way, he's creating a sense of regress because if he has one great talent, it is pitting people against each other. And so one way in which he is causing us to regress is by this very rhetoric that casts all of politics in apocalyptic terms, where it's Trump or it's ruin. It's Trump or it's the devastation of the country. And when you cast things like that, it inflames people to such a degree that the sense of crisis becomes a crisis itself. And here's an analogy that I used, and that is, Michael, I'm sure you remember the old Flight 93 essay from 2016.
Sure.
Michael Anton's essay where he said, essentially, like, electing Trump is a risk, but it's either elect Trump or we die, like the country dies. And I said, look, there's a way in which a false sense of crisis can create its own emergency. So let's take his Flight 93 analogy. You think the plane's being hijacked, you storm the cockpit, you choke the pilots, and then you take control and you realize, oh, crud, it was just turbulence. And now I don't know how to fly this plane. Well, you've created your own crisis. And I think that that's one of the things that's happening in America is that we've bought in so much to this sense that I win or it's all over. And if I lose, it's the end, that we're creating this just sense of emergency that is ripping Americans apart. And so, there's a lot of examples of this kind of overreaction to events creating crises. And you just see it again and again and again in history. I mean, August 1914, for example, is that's an example of when the assassination of Archduke Francis Ferdinand turns into, until then, the most catastrophic war in world history. We're very good as people at overreacting, and overreaction can be very dangerous. And so that's what I was trying to do, is temper that sense.
Let's speak of a recent reaction that's very controversial. Rob Reiner, a truly beloved comedian and director, and someone who was revered in Hollywood for his fundamental decency, he's murdered by his son, apparently. And President Trump found it necessary to offer a reaction where he basically said he had it coming because he had opposed Trump. He was a victim of Trump derangement syndrome, as if that had anything at all to do with his murder. And then yesterday, Trump was asked about that, whether he stood by that statement, which has been criticized by most Republicans. And he said he did because he was not a fan of Rob Reiner because Rob Reiner didn't support him. What do you make of that?
So that's a perfect example of like creating your own crisis. So the easiest thing to do in the world when somebody dies is to either shut up or say something nice. Like that. This is the easiest thing you could possibly imagine. All right. But what does he do? No, it's like he pulls the pin on a cultural hand grenade and just throws it towards America. And he creates this just utterly deranged, rambling string of insults that isn't just disrespectful to the families of the fallen, but it's just completely false and inflammatory at the same time. It's like, how can you make something both false and perfectly inflammatory? Well, he did it. And so then once again, you get into this whole thing you see online where Trump's defenders will say, well, there's liberals who are mean about Charlie Kirk. And you just get back into this cycle because you have to defend your side against all comers. And now, thankfully, you saw some Republicans breaking ranks with Trump here. And I think that that's part of a trend. I think his sort of hold over the party that's been so tight for so long is starting to slip.
Do you think that Susie Wiles is one of those Republicans who is starting to reconsider some of the golden age rhetoric of the MAGA crowd?
I got to say that this is the absolute taboo for a pundit. I have no idea what's going on there. Like, I'm supposed to have a take on this. I'm supposed to have an idea about this. We're in uncharted waters, Michael. A sitting chief of staff, like, rips her boss and everyone around him on the record in public.
10 interviews.
I've never seen this before. So literally, I just have to confess to your audience, like, I'm still processing this. I don't know what to say about it.
Well, again, what do you think Trump is going to say about it? Do you think she can continue as chief of staff for the second Trump administration?
Let me put it this way. She did the one thing in this Trump administration that I think is most likely to lead to termination, which is disloyalty. We know that incompetence and corruption are totally fine with this administration so long as you're loyal. You can bring the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic on a Signal chat and disclose war plans before the war starts, and you're fine as long as you hate the media enough. But you can't turn on Trump, and I'm very curious. I mean, but it's also weirdly in this second term, he seems to be very focused on not firing people. His first term, he had a lot of turnover, and I think that he regrets that. And so he's wanting more stability now. So I don't know. Like I said, this is uncharted waters for me. I mean, we're watching a live political social experiment. What happens when a chief of staff turns on her own boss?
Who do you think is the top candidate for the next firing by President Trump? Robert Kennedy, Pete Hegseth. Who do you nominate?
Whoever annoys Trump without also annoying the media. Because if the media is calling for the firing, I think Trump digs in. If he's been mad for his own reasons, I think he'll get rid of somebody. So I think, he's had a number of cabinet and sort of cabinet equivalent officials who've done terrible and embarrassing and incompetent things. But as long as they keep both arms wrapped around Trump, they've been fine. But those who turn on Trump, that's why I'm very, very interested to see what happens with Susie Wiles.
Well, again, it is a dramatic situation. And also, very quickly, as a decorated veteran of armed services for the United States, are we heading to war with Venezuela?
By all external indicators, it looks like we are. Troop movements, ship movements. It could be an elaborate bluff. I mean, we're already engaging in preliminary armed conflict, preliminary strikes with these drug boats. So if you were going to see the same kind of maneuvering from another country aimed at a smaller country, you would say they're prepping for war. But obviously, he's not gone to Congress. He's not announced his intentions. We just don't know.
And again, that is one of the questions that David French, as time moves on, will help us answer. His most recent column, which is extremely significant and very powerful, is posted at our website at michaelmedved.com. Keep it up. We need your voice and appreciate your voice, which is a tremendous benefit to this greatest nation on God's green earth.